Welcome to Season 2 of Feeding Families on the EcoParent Podcast Network. And don't forget to check out the new season of our other top podcast, Raising Kids Naturally. But before diving into this episode, a little shameless self-promotion from my son.
My dad started EcoParent when I was in the womb. Now it's pretty much the only parenting magazine still in print. If you like the podcast, you'll probably like the magazine too. You can subscribe online. You might also be interested in EcoParent's online courses, especially the kids nutrition and kids wellness courses. Stick around until the end of the episode and my dad will give you a discount code. Enjoy the show.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about food and nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions to help you overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Hey families, welcome back. We are talking sports nutrition today. So it's a little bit of a deviation from what we've been talking about all season, but I think it really fits because what we've been talking about is how to nourish our kids and some of the real practical pieces around getting the right nutrients into them, understanding that nourishment goes beyond just what we eat and how, blowing up the word nourishment to be more of a holistic word than just food. And we've been exploring all of the different aspects of that. But I really wanted to have someone come on the podcast to talk about specifically about nourishing young athletes because I have athletes in my family, first of all, and I see what's going on. First of all, I think when you have a kid who is really interested in being an athlete, whether that's looking for competition or if it's just they're excited about sports, it's a real opportunity to start to talk to them about nourishing their bodies. So that's one thing that I wanted to talk about. And then the other thing is that I see the flip side of what's going on with sports is that a lot of young athletes are undernourished or not recovering well. There is, I have a teenager who's some of his friends are into bodybuilding or working out and just not really understanding how to nourish their body. And I don't see a whole lot of good role models or good, information for kids and teens around optimizing their body for performance or for athletics. So I asked Melissa to come because that's her wheelhouse. And Melissa, so thank you for coming, first of all, Melissa. Well, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a certified holistic nutritionist in the Ottawa, Canada area, and I specialize in sports nutrition for teen athletes, mostly with the elite level hockey players. And that's because that's what my background's in. So I grew up playing very competitive hockey through like my teen years into college. I went to a college that didn't have a women's team, so I just basically played on the men's the men's team at my college, and then I played competitive hockey after that. There was a sort of professional women's hockey league back then, but it wasn't the same as what we have today. But I did get drafted to that league. Unfortunately, I didn't end up making the team, and I think part of that is because of the types of nutrition I had as a kid and a couple of other factors as well, but I had a lot of injuries as a child. I was always sick as a child, and a lot of that had to do with improper nutrition. Also, just not even recognizing some food intolerances and allergies that I had that were always in my diet that led to a lot of inflammation, which also caused some of those injuries. And so, yeah, then as an adult, I ended up with multiple concussions and then post concussion syndrome. So I walked away from hockey for about 8 years. I'm back on the ice as of last year, but just that whole journey for me led me to one, wanting to learn about nutrition and becoming a nutritionist, but then wanting to make sure that like the next generation of athletes don't go through the same things that I went through and that they can learn how to optimize their nutrition so that they can have longevity in their sport. And then aside from hockey, I also like competed in obstacle course racing and a whole bunch of other sports. So like I just kind of tie all those things in together.
Yeah, and when you see, because you're working with kids specifically, and in hockey, and helping them optimize their nutrition, which really is like a superpower, right? Like if you fuel your body right, and I think, well, like, correct me if I'm wrong, because you've seen like the amateur world and the semi-professional world, and like at the very professional level, I feel like they probably know this. They probably know that fuel matters. Do they not?
They do, but they don't. So I, interestingly enough, did a nutrition workshop with a professional football team not too long ago, and I was actually shocked by some of the questions that these 25-year-old professional football players were asking, and they were very basic knowledge nutrition things. And that is a big misconception, is that people think that pro athletes know everything. So then teenagers will follow these pro athletes online, and then they see, they're like, oh, here's what I eat in a day, or here's what I'm eating before a workout or before my game. And it's misinformation. Or a professional athlete will partner up with a company like Prime Hydration. And then these teen athletes think, oh, they're a pro athlete, they know what they're doing. And the reality is, most of them don't, unless they've had like a dietitian on their team, a sports nutritionist on their team. And not every sports team, professional sports team, employs dietitians or nutritionists. In some of the bigger leagues like the NFL, most teams do, but not all of them. The NHL, not every team works with a dietitian or a nutritionist. And in some of the smaller professional leagues, like the CFL, for example, they just don't have the budget for that. So you think that they would prioritize that, but they don't. They're prioritizing things like their strength and conditioning coaches and their mental health performance coaches and the video coaches. But nutrition always falls to the wayside, even at the pro level. And it's super frustrating.
That is so interesting. I'm so glad you said that, because every parent listening needs to know that, because this is what your kids are watching on YouTube, on Instagram. They're watching their idols and thinking that they know something about this when they don't. That's fascinating. So, thinking back to like your history, what do you think you wish you had known, and how would that have changed things for you as a young athlete?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is probably just that it was okay to eat a lot. I was a very like skinny, small female when I was in high school. Like I was probably not even 100 pounds at one point up until I was like 17 or 18 years old and playing hockey. But part of it was like you would go to have lunch with your girlfriends and they'd be like, "Wow, that's a lot of food," and then you'd get embarrassed and not want to eat that much food. Or I'd go to like someone's house to eat, and the parents would make comments of like, wow, you eat so much more than my kid. And then you're embarrassed but also feel guilty to like eat someone else's food in that kind of quantity. And then even at home, it's like, your parents give you a certain amount of food and they give themselves a certain amount of food, and that's what's available to you and that's what you eat, and then that's it. And so I think part of that is just having parents, like, I wish I knew that it was okay to eat that much. But even now when I work with athletes and the parents and the coaches, it's trying to teach the parents that like your kid will probably eat more food than you, and that's totally fine. Like you will eat more food than your friends, and that's totally fine. And you have to mind your own plate and not worry about what everybody else is doing around you. And just also like I went through a lot of long period of time where I was stuck in diet culture and like demonizing certain foods. And so there was a period in my 20s where I like cut out all sugar and I was not adding salt to my food and I was eating clean, and it was this like perfectly unprocessed diet. And all of a sudden I was weak all the time, having headaches. I was like getting dizzy while I was working out and going to the doctor, and they're like, "Yeah, you should go home and like eat a bowl of salty soup and like have a donut." And I was like, "What? Like that's so wild." And they were like, "Your blood pressure is way too low." And it was because I was cutting out like foods. I was following the diet culture to have like skinny abs instead of following what athletes need to eat. And I was cutting out key nutrients like carbohydrates and sodium that athletes need to perform well. And so, yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is just not having followed diet culture and the social media and things like that.
Yeah, and I think kids in particular are really susceptible to diet dogma of, like what we were saying before, like, oh, well, so and so does this and they're an elite athlete or whatever. They're very susceptible to that, and they're not learning about nutrition anywhere but at home, if that, right? So it really is important for us to learn a thing or two, or talk to someone like Melissa, who's like, no, no, okay, here's what your body needs. And something that struck me when you were explaining your story, it's like also paying attention to how you feel and how you're performing and picking up on those cues. Kids are not fantastic at doing that unless we open up the conversation with them. I find. But if we open up the conversation, they can be really intuitive, and they can be like, yeah, like I do feel like I could be faster, or I could, or I am getting kind of dizzy, and that doesn't seem right. But we have to open up the conversation because they're probably not going to have that anywhere else. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think too, part of the issue is a lot of parents, no offense to parents or coaches, I know they mean well, but a lot of times the diet culture steeps from them. They come from a bit of diet culture where maybe they went through the generation of fats are no good for us. We have to avoid fats at all costs. Then they went through the generation of, oh my God, sugar is horrible. We have to demonize sugar. And so some of that comes in for sure. Like I've been contacted by parents and coaches who ask me to do workshops, and they specifically tell me, can you come do this workshop and tell the kids to stop eating sugar, tell them they can't have candy, tell them they can't have ice cream, tell them they're not allowed to eat this. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I will never tell someone they cannot eat something, because you're just setting them up for a bad relationship with food. So it's just like reframing their mindset around food and those diet culture influences. But it's also, I think, not enough adults. Also, they're not intuitive with their body. They don't know when they don't feel well until they feel well. And I've seen this with adult athletes or just adult people I've worked with in general. They think they feel fine without sleep or without water or without all these nutrients. Then all of a sudden you make them sleep more, you have them drinking more water, you have them eating more protein, you have them cut out foods that maybe were creating inflammation in their body. And then they start to see what feeling good feels like. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how terrible I felt before. And so I think it's the same thing with our young athletes. They don't necessarily know what they don't know. They don't know that they don't feel great. They don't know what they're supposed to feel like. So there are some signs that the parents could be watching for that maybe aren't as intuitive for the kids to be aware of. So even things like, if you notice your kid is struggling to focus at school, a lot of people are quick to just be like, oh, they have ADD, let's get them on medication. Like, maybe it's because they don't sleep enough or don't eat enough of the right foods, and they're not well hydrated, and they're not getting enough calories. If they're always tired outside of like a workout situation and always needing to nap, or they're irritable and have mood swings, again, with females, it's quick to be like, oh, they must be PMSing. Like, it's not always just brushing things under the rug. We have to pay attention to these things. But especially like if they're getting sick more often, they're getting injured, they're recovering slowly from workouts, even things like constipation and gut issues, which, some kids might not be having open conversations with their parents about this. But if they're constipated or have gut issues, a lot of times that's actually a sign they're not eating enough too. So there's a lot of things we could be looking for.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, and it is all interconnected, right? So it's hard as a parent to be like, you know, you don't want to throw up the red flags unnecessarily and panic about your kid. But so if you think your child's not, if you're seeing some of those things and you're like, okay, I think maybe they're over exercising, undernourishing. What do you want? What's like one top thing that you want parents to know? We've already talked about like not demonizing certain foods and making sure that they eat enough quantity of food. But in terms of, what does an athlete need for nourishment, and does it depend on the sport, and does it depend on level of competition? Like, are there those nuances in there, or can we make some blanket statements?
Yeah, so you can honestly make mostly blanket statements for 98% of athletes. And that's the other interesting thing I noticed too, is so many people will come to me thinking that they're unique, they're special. It's like, well, my kid plays soccer, so it's completely different than this kid who does this sport. And I'm like, no, 98% of the stuff I'm going to tell you works across the board for every single level, for international athletes, competitive, older athletes, younger athletes, because it just comes down to the basic nutrition foundations, making sure that we're getting enough carbohydrates, we're eating enough fruits and vegetables, and getting those colorful foods in, making sure we're eating enough protein, getting enough hydration, eating some healthy fats, getting sleep, reducing stress in our lives. Like all of those things are what everyone should be doing, not just athletes. And so athletes think they need this like top of the pyramid, like special 1%, nutrition information or like these biohacking things, and they don't. They need to be doing the bottom of the pyramid, all these nutrition foundations. And once they're doing that 85 to 90% of the time consistently, then we can start looking at some other smaller things to look at, like maybe some supplementation, depending on their age, or some cool recovery techniques depending on their age or their sport. But for the most part, yeah, everyone needs to kind of focus on the same type of thing. And when you notice your athletes have those signs or symptoms that they're not eating enough, it is generally a quick fix unless they are into more of like the disordered eating territory, in which case they would need to go see someone and work with a specialist for that. But if there are just some signs that they're not eating enough and they're willing to eat more and there's no history of eating disorders there, it's just as simple as finding some ways to add in some more calories into their diet, whether it's adding in some more healthy fats, like, adding more, not essential oils, adding more oils to their food, like, yeah, like olive oil, avocado oil when you're cooking, once you plate their food, add some oils into it, add some butter or let them have full fat dairy or some full fat cheese. It's adding in more carbohydrates. And as soon as we add those carbohydrates and the calories, it's amazing how fast these signs disappear for teen athletes.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of that's how I feel about brain health. Make people who I work with are dealing with anxiety or ADHD and things like that. And do they need a special diet? No, they need an optimal diet because they have higher requirements for certain things. But it's the same thing that everybody needs. It's the healthy fats. It's the good quality carbohydrates. It's the sufficient protein. Same thing for athletes. I would say it's what I'm hearing is that, it's the same basics. It's just potentially more of it. And you want to optimize it because you want to optimize performance, right? And same thing with brain health. You want to optimize diet because you want to optimize performance. So I think that's important because we do get stuck in like the athlete diet, the ADHD diet, the anxiety diet, and it's let's get back to the fundamentals of sufficient food, sufficient nourishment. Yeah. Well, can we talk about sugar because it's come up a couple of times, and it comes up in the context of carbohydrate cravings, which I think a lot of athletes get because they need the energy. But then it also comes up in terms of sodas and coaches saying they should not eat sugar and performance and inflammation and all of that stuff. So let's talk. What's your thought about sugar and athletes?
Yeah. So with everything, I think moderation is key. The thing with athletes is they definitely need more carbohydrates. Does it have to come from sugar? Not necessarily, but there are times and places where the only thing that's going to work is potentially a fast digesting, more processed food. And for example, that would be, let's say it's 30 minutes before a game, a practice, or even in the middle of a game or a practice. The reality is they can't sit there and eat brown rice and have this nice unprocessed whole food that's full of carbohydrates 30 minutes before or in the middle of a game. Like, just imagine eating this whole food with tons of fiber and then trying to continue running or playing your sport. It's just not physically possible. They're going to end up with an upset stomach, throwing up, so like pooping or whatever, and we don't want that. So in those situations, that's where we're looking for sugar, and it's like something that's fast digesting. So there's still a broad spectrum there in terms of what that looks like. That could look like eating something that's highly processed, like some candy, that's going to provide 30 to 60 grams of sugar and carbohydrates per hour. But if you don't want to eat candy, you can have a banana, and the banana is the whole food source of sugar. So there's a wide spectrum there, and there's even products you can have that are in the middle of that range too. So those, like, that's it fruit bars, those are still packaged food. They're handy. You can throw them in a bag. They're not going to get beat up like a banana would. And they're still a packaged food, but they're a whole food based product, right? So there's a wide variety of stuff there. For me, my priority is getting athletes eating. And so if that means the candy is what we reach for first and eventually work our way to the whole food sources, we do that because it also takes training the gut. And so if they're not used to eating something like a banana that does have a bit more fiber in it, it will digest a little slower than something like candy. That's where we're going to go for the candy and then eventually work our way to training them to eat something like a banana or a Larabar or something that's more whole food based. So I get it. Like, I get that there's parents who are like, I don't want my kid just eating candy all day. And that's not what sports dietitians and nutritionists are telling you when they say it's okay for them to have sugar. I'm not saying go drink Gatorade in your lunchbox at school while you're sitting all day. What I'm telling a parent it's okay is in the middle of a sports situation when they need an actual sports drink, that's what Gatorade is. And so it's taking away that diet culture, the fear around sugar, and just explaining to them how the body works and what the body needs in that situation. And even outside of sports situation, like I don't want people cutting out sugar from their diets completely. Everybody likes to eat food that they enjoy eating. And so it's important for kids to still have foods in their diet that they enjoy eating. But if you learn how to optimize that around your workouts, like if your kid loves candy and you don't necessarily want them eating candy all day every day, then save the candy as the pre-workout, as the fuel that they eat during their sports, because now they get to eat candy every day when they're doing their sport, but at least it's being used in the moment for the sport situation versus them sitting around doing their homework or watching TV or playing video games eating candy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think again, it's a really good opportunity to talk to your kids about what different types of fuel do in your body. And that sugar is, it's like we use the analogy of like the fire, right? The sugar is, if you're building a fire, the sugars are like the twigs that go on the fire. They burn really quick and really fast, but it's not sustained energy. And then it's going to make you tired if you don't have anything underneath, if you don't have any big logs on the fire to sustain you, you're just gonna be burning it up. And from a development perspective with kids, they're burning through fuel really quickly, but if they're only burning through twigs, they're gonna crash. I mean, that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's when I see, the metabolic syndromes and the eating disorders and the anxiety and the ADHD and all of the issues come in. That's the signal that your body's not getting the fuel that it requires. And yes, we could get into genetics and we could get into, gut health and all of that stuff. But fundamentally, if your unique body is not getting the nourishment that it requires, you're going to start seeing all kinds of symptoms, whether it's skin symptoms or gut symptoms or energy symptoms or brain symptoms or whatever. So that's a red flag for people. And I love how you're focusing on just coming back to the foundations of, okay, let's get in the all of the nourishment. Sugar is a nutrient. We had Hannah Crum come on and we were talking about kombucha on the podcast, and we talked about this too because people are scared of kombucha because it's got sugar. And she was talking about like context is king when it comes to sugar. You have to look at the context in which that sugar is being eaten. And I hear you saying the same thing. Athletes require that burst of energy sometimes.
Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Want to learn to cook healthier for your family? Looking for meal planning and food shopping tips for your busy lifestyle? Maybe you'd like to brush up on some cooking techniques and get some holistic nutrition and recipe tips. The Holistic Culinary Certificate workshops offered by CSNN are open to everyone. Some of the workshops include cooking for kids, alternative baking and raw sweets, probiotic foods and beverages, and international cuisines, just to name a few. They're available at select CSNN branches. You can learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family or follow the links in the show notes.
There's a lot of people who are afraid to eat sugar because it leads to sugar cravings. And I don't find that to be true with most people. What I find to be true for most people that I work, especially in the athlete context, are the athletes who crave sugar and feel like they have no control around sugar. Those are the athletes who typically are too restrictive in their diets and aren't getting enough calories and aren't getting enough carbohydrates in general, especially in and around their workouts. So then what happens is their body's screaming for carbohydrates. And what it sounds to them is like, now I need to eat cookies, ice cream, whatever it is in massive quantities because my body wants it. Whereas, had they properly had breakfast, had they stayed hydrated all day, had they slept well, had they had the right meal before, during, and after their workouts or their games, they won't have those sugar cravings. So
Hmm. Well, we can use the fire analogy again because if you're building a fire, you want the big logs, you want the medium logs, and then you want the little twigs. And if your fire is starting to go out, you're not going to put a big log on there to try to revive the fire. It's just going to smother it, right? You're going to put little twigs and you're going to blow it and you're going to nurture it, and then you're going to get a little bit of a flame and a little bit more substance to your fire, and then you could put your log on. So I think that's sort of what you're talking about in terms of getting the sugar in. Okay, we have to talk about sports drinks because that's a big topic. And I know we could talk for hours about sports drinks, but I'm talking, between Prime and Gatorade and BioSteel and like all these rehydration drinks. I mean, they were in the locker rooms of my kids' hockey teams as young as like 10, 9 years old as the thing that kids need. That, and I also want to ask you about chocolate milk because that's the other one that is always in the locker rooms.
Well, so the chocolate milk one, I'll touch on first. I love chocolate milk as a recommendation for most athletes as a recovery option. And that's because it has the hydration. So once we're done a workout, within that first half hour, ideally we're putting in a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein. A lot of people mix that up. They think they need more protein than carbohydrates, but we need more carbs than protein and we need to rehydrate. And so chocolate milk is all in one. It's the hydration. It's got more because it's chocolate and it has the sugar. It ends up having double or triple the amount of carbohydrates to protein. So it's the perfect like post workout if you're okay with dairy. Yeah, and if you're not, you can do chocolate soy milk for the people who are okay with soy because soy milk is the same like nutritional profile as regular milk. So I love that.
I would imagine you could also use the Ripple pea milk, the chocolate. That's probably similar as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then for sports drinks, so yeah, this is like there's so much nuance here, and it's a very problematic industry, and there's a lot of sports drinks or what people think are sports drinks, but they're actually hydration drinks, and then they get the two mixed up and they think they're a sports drink, especially when they partner with pro athletes and then give the impression that it's a sports drink when it's not. So a true sports drink will have 3 to 8% carbohydrates. And so what that means is for every 100 milliliters of liquid, there will be a certain amount of carbohydrates to equal 3 to 8% of those calories coming from carbohydrates. There will be 110 to 220 milligrams of sodium per 8 ounces and about 30 milligrams of potassium per 8 ounces. And that's what we're looking for in a true sports drink. Whereas something like a hydration drink won't typically have the carbohydrates. It will have some sodium, it will have some potassium. These are those electrolyte beverages that are flooding the market right now. But if you look at a lot of those hydration beverages, a lot of them are junk too. Like they don't have this amount of sodium or potassium in them. And the main one that comes to mind is like Prime. So Prime only has 25 calories. So right there, like that's not doing anything for an athlete. 25 calories is nothing, but it only has 10 milligrams of sodium. So it's not doing anything. And it does have a lot of potassium. And so that's what they try to like promote. They're like, wow, it has a ton of potassium. But from some of the research I've done, like that high amount of potassium is actually causing negative health effects for athletes because it's too much potassium. So you're not supposed to have a ton of potassium, even though our body needs potassium. And then when we think about drinks like BioSteel, so BioSteel would be again, it's a hydration drink, not a sports drink, because there's no sugar, there's no carbohydrates in BioSteel, so it can't be called a sports drink. And then I personally love certain hydration drinks that will provide a decent amount of sodium. And for what I use with those is instead of a sports drink, I will do a hydration beverage and then pair it with a carbohydrate snack because it allows me to be in more control of what I eat because I know Gatorade is problematic for a lot of people. I know a lot of people don't like the ingredients that are in it. And so the sugar aspect of Gatorade is proper. Like that is a true sports drink in the moment, in the context that we were talking about. That is what an athlete needs to sustain their energy, to replenish the fluids that they've lost, to replenish the carbohydrates that they've lost. But I get that the ingredients are not ideal for a lot of people. So if you're trying to avoid the food dyes and the other additives and ingredients that are in that, that's where you can use something like a hydration drink that is, sugar free because it's all natural, the colors are all natural, and then pair it with your carbohydrate snack. And so that's where I would do something like have a bottle of something like BioSteel and pair it with a banana. And now you've replaced what would be in a Gatorade, but it's all natural. So that's a much better option. And then in terms of BioSteel, so BioSteel's a bit low on the sodium side of things too, to be honest. Like it's the bare minimum that an athlete would need. And so there's a new product on the market that got it's it's the original founders of BioSteel have now come out and they now own a new company called Quench. And so that product is like BioSteel 2.0. So they've taken all the issues they had with the BioSteel product from the research that they've done and they've reformulated it with a new brand. And it's the original co-founders of BioSteel. And so that's the product that I'm personally using right now, like for my ball hockey games, for my ice hockey games, when I go play tennis, because it has a bit more sodium, it has a bit more potassium. It does have some BCAAs in there, which is also okay. Like that's fine for teen athletes to have in their bodies. So it's some amino acids which come from protein, so it's okay. And the benefit of having a little bit of those branched chain amino acids is that it just helps start to like help the recovery process of your muscles, but it also spares your muscles. So if you get into a situation where you are depleted of carbohydrates, your body will sometimes try to break down energy from your muscles. So by having a little bit of those amino acids in your sports drink while you're performing, it'll help protect your muscle mass. So I personally love using something like Quench and then I pair it up with my candy or my piece of fruit or my like whole food bar and that's what I use as my quote unquote sports drink instead of a Gatorade.
Yeah. So it brings up the conversation of recovery, right? So we've talked about how kids may need a little bit of sugar during their sport situation, like when they're maybe even right before, and I think you said in the half hour before and then during. So carbohydrates and maybe even a little bit of fast acting sugar might be appropriate at that point. And then recovery is something that I'm also seeing doesn't get discussed at all. So, my kids come back from hockey practice or a hockey game or they're at a hockey tournament and it's all like pizza and fast food and it's like it's hard to find stuff when you're at the hotel and you've done some really good stuff about what you take when you travel to tournaments, I noticed. So people need to follow Melissa and find her for all those tips. But then like the next day they're out it again and I'm like, wait a second, we need to actually recover this little body so that we don't get into the downward spiral. And that's from a nutrition perspective, but I think it's also from a metabolism perspective and from a gut health perspective too, because if you over exercise and don't recover, you're going to set yourself up for gut problems. So can you just talk a little bit about post either workout or practice, or I guess there's like three questions in one, but post exertion recovery, what do you think is appropriate for kids and what is not appropriate for them from a nutrition, but also just recovery, like the other aspects of recovery?
Yeah. And so one thing there with like tournaments or any situation where they'll be competing or training again within an 8-hour window, that is somewhere where like a sports drink is beneficial during their activity because it helps jumpstart your recovery before your next session in a tournament situation. So like for me, hockey tournaments are a Gatorade place, but like their regular hockey games, for example, probably not. Because if you think about it, your kid has an hour of ice time, or maybe 2 hours, depending on the age and level they are. It might be a 2 hour block of ice, but your kid isn't playing for 2 hours, right? Like if you go and factor in the actual shifts on and off that they have, most of our kids have 12 minutes of ice time, 15 minutes of ice time, which doesn't warrant the use of like a high sports drink like Gatorade. But in a tournament situation where they've got two, maybe three games in the same day, and they're going to be sweating a ton, this is where something like a Gatorade or more of a sports drink like that with more sugar in it and more of the electrolytes would be beneficial to help with the recovery. But yeah, like jumping into like pizza and things that are high in fat and super greasy isn't going to help with the recovery, especially in a back to back situation. Again, we're looking to really have double the amount of carbohydrates to protein. But if you think about your typical snack bar food, restaurant food that the kids are grabbing, like your pizza, there's not really much protein on that. And it's not a lot of carbohydrates. It's mostly just fats. And fats are actually slowing down our digestion. They're making us sluggish. They're going to actually they're going to slow down the recovery process because you can't get in the carbohydrates and the hydration and the protein fast enough when you're eating that kind of food. And so at those places, you can still make better decisions where you're getting like grilled chicken, right? Like instead of chicken fingers and french fries, like sure, maybe have some french fries, but do it with like a chicken breast or something like that. Or get a pasta dish that has chicken or meatballs versus like an Alfredo sauce that's very thick and creamy and it's going to take a long time to digest. But also, I find a lot of athletes aren't very hungry after they're done playing intense games. And so the heavier the food is that you're trying to eat, the less of it you're going to eat too, right? And so you really want something that's easy to digest, some simple pasta, some rice and chicken. And parents can be packing this kind of stuff with them to have in their hotel rooms if you have the time to cook before you travel. But you can also bring some quick snack, like bring a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jam to your hotel room, and that's a great like post recovery like post game snack that's going to provide some carbohydrates, some healthy fats, some protein, and it's a lot easier on their digestion. Pair it with a glass of milk or soy milk or the pea ripple, and you've got like a complete meal there, and it's way cheaper than going out to a restaurant too. So
Yeah, yeah, it's so good. I keep coming back to the fire analogy. I'm building it as we go because I think if we can do is use it again, right? It's like you're depleted after your game. If you've had a little bit of sugar throughout your game, you're going to be less depleted. Your fire's still going to be a little bit fiery. But if you haven't had any of that, then you're probably fairly depleted. And so to stick a fat on there, which is like a big log, takes a long time to digest. And yeah, it's long lasting and it's going to keep you full, but it's going to squish your fire a little bit more. So you're saying get a little, I'd say like the big logs are the fat, the medium logs are the protein, the small twigs are the carbs. I'm literally building this as we go. So feel free to use it, but I think it's a good one. So you don't want to squish it with a high fatty something. You do want maybe a little bit of protein, but if you're exhausted and depleted, you want some sugar first. So it's almost like the reverse of what we usually teach in nutrition, which is to get the fats and the proteins in there, and then top up with the carbs. But when you're in an athlete situation and you've used up so much energy, you want to rekindle your fire a little bit differently, I think.
yeah, I love that. And that is with athletes. Athletes are different. And when we're talking about regular people who are maybe more sedentary and they're trying to be mindful of their sugar levels and their metabolism, we do tell them fill up on fiber and protein because it'll make you so full you will eat less carbohydrates. But with athletes, we don't want them to eat less carbohydrates. So if they spend their time filling up too much on fiber, too much on healthy fats, too much on protein, then they're not getting enough carbohydrates. And that's where that diet culture does seep into sports, especially I find with older, like athletes that are in their 20s and they're starting to like care a lot more about body composition. They're seeing a lot of influence from the outside world. That's where they start to go, well, I eat super clean because I eat salads all day and all these vegetables, but they're crowding out the space in their stomach to eat enough of the carbohydrates that are what their body needs to perform at a high level.
Yeah, yeah. This is such good stuff, Melissa. I'm so glad you came onto the podcast. I feel like we could talk forever about this stuff, but I do hope that people follow up with you because it is such uh it's an underserved population when it comes to nutrition advice and mentorship. As we talked about it in the beginning, it's confusing for people and it's a little bit different. And working in the work that I do with the kids who are really struggling in school and the kids who are really struggling with their emotional regulation, you're setting yourself up. I don't want to be like all doom and gloom about it, but you are setting up a child for that by not, if they're an athlete, you're setting them up for cognitive issues if they're not being well fueled and they're over exercising and undernourishing. You're going to start to see it in their academics. You're going to start to see it in their mood and in their behavior and in their social relationships. And in the world today, very few people are making that connection. And it's considered two very separate things, but it's not. It is the exact same thing. And I worry about child athletes because there is a high incidence, I guess, of anxiety, of depression, of suicide, of ADHD, of all this stuff. And then they get a concussion, and that adds to the whole thing. We had Kirk Gare come on the podcast last season and talk about concussion recovery and how, like, if you fuel the body properly from the get-go and your fire is burning and it's all great and it's not super depleted, if you get a concussion in that state, you're going to fare much better than if you are completely depleted and malnourished and then you get the concussion. Recovery is going to take longer and you're going to have more post-concussion syndrome, right?
That's my literal experience, because like the worst concussions I had and the worst recovery I had was when I was dieting while being an athlete. And it took a long time to recover from those concussions. And I had to walk away from the sport I love for 8 years and couldn't go compete at the next level that I knew I could have and go play professionally because of those concussions. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I'm doing, is because, these kids spend their lives practicing and playing to hopefully get, whether it's a scholarship or to go play at the collegiate level or get into the, OHL or the Olympics or professional sports or whatever it is. And the parents are investing so much time and money and effort. Like, for me, it drives me crazy when they don't care about nutrition because they're doing such a disservice, and they're so willing to pay. And even the sports teams, they're so willing to pay for the matching clothing and the bags and the coaches, the strength and conditioning coaches, but they don't think about the nutrition. And I'm like, you've invested so much money and so much time and so much effort, and to not prioritize nutrition and to not have room in it for your budget, whether you're the parent or the coach or the team, it's crazy to me. And it's something I'm constantly battling with teams and coaches and parents, where they're like, we don't have the money for it. And I'm like, but you're paying all these personal trainers and the skating coaches and the this coach and the that coach. Like, it has to be part of that team. You need a team of people working with your athletes and making sure that all of these different aspects of their lives are being taken care of.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's really quite interesting. So I hope that people contact Melissa if you have an athlete who and you want to improve their performance, or just not even improve their performance, just fuel them correctly. Connect with Melissa, but also do listen to the episode we did last season about concussions. We did talk about sugar in the context of concussion recovery, and it's a little bit of a different story. So in acute concussion. So do listen to both of those and put it all together if your child has had a concussion, because we got to protect these little brains and bodies. Thank you so much, Melissa. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my website is my name, melissaboufunos.com. Same thing with Instagram. And there's all kinds of different free resources on my website. I have a free meal timing guide that parents can download. I have a guide to buying protein powder that parents and coaches can download. And then for any coaches or even parents that are working with the teams in like a manager position, I offer like team workshops either virtually or in person. So you can get that information on my website and look into having me come out and do a conversation with your kids' sports teams.
Amazing. I love that. It's like it's a superpower, right? It's like the hidden gem. Like, oh, we got Melissa on our team. We're gonna like optimize ourselves. And I would be so interested to see in a tournament situation how kids fare with you on board versus not having a clue on how to fuel themselves. It would be a super interesting study to do.
Yeah, I've probably could get that information, but I can tell you there's a few teams I've worked with that like I follow their coaches on social media, and those are the teams that go on to win like the tournaments and the championships. And I'm like, I wonder, like, I don't want to take all the credit because obviously they're like the on ice stuff matters too. But when I see that, I just get very excited because I'm like, nutrition can make or break that difference for sure.
Yeah, it's so foundational. Thank you for what you do for kids, and I'm so glad that you do this. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you feel called to, share it with another family who needs to hear it. There are more tools from me at jesssherman.com/learn and jesssherman.com/membership, alongside all the great resources you'll find at EcoParent. Things are changing for kids, and the more we come together in conversation as parents, the more we can find ease and joy as we raise the next generation together. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, keep at it. You have the most important job in the world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. If you think this podcast is great, our host, Jess Sherman, has condensed everything you need to know to nourish your family into a truly fantastic 7-hour video course. You can learn more at ecoparent.ca/learn. It will change the way you think about feeding your family. You might also be interested in our Kids Wellness course, taught by Dr. Leslie Solomonian. As a thank you for listening, I'd like to offer you a 15% discount on any one of our online courses or any subscription to EcoParent magazine. Just head on over to ecoparent.ca, hit the Eco Shop button in the navigation bar, and use code FEEDING15 at checkout. All caps, no spaces, that's FEEDING15. Till next time.